Hi, I'm Sharyn, Education and Youth Librarian with Wyndham City Libraries. Welcome back to Virtual Teen Read Along for Chapter 17 of Tomorrow When the War Began by John Marsden. In the last chapter, we found out the hermit was acquitted of murder, and Ali is becoming increasingly attracted to Lee. She also worries about the moral implications of what she has done in killing to survive. Let's read Chapter 17.
Robin and Kevin and Corrie and Chris were beaming. It wasn't hard to beam back. It was such a relief, such a joy to see them again. I hugged them desperately, only then aware how frightened I'd been for them. But for once, everything seemed to have gone well. It was wonderful. They hadn't told Homer and Fee much because they were tired, because they didn't want to repeat themselves when they reached Lee and me. All they'd said was they hadn't seen any of our families. They'd been told they were safe and at the showground. When I heard this, it was such a relief that I sat down quickly on the ground, as though I'd had the breath knocked out of me. Lee leant against a tree with his hands over his face. I didn't think anyone else mattered to us much. We did have lots of questions, but we could see how exhausted everyone was, so we were content to let them have their breakfast before they told us any more. And with a good breakfast in them, even a few fresh eggs, cooked quickly and dangerously on a small fire, which we put out just as quickly, they settled down, full of food and adrenaline, to tell us the lot. Robin did most of the talking. She'd already been their unofficial leader when they left, and it was interesting to see how much she was running the show now. Lee and I sat on a log holding hands. Fee sat against Homer in the V formed by his open legs, and Kevin lay on the ground with his head in Corrie's lap. It was like perfect partners, and although I still wondered if I might have liked to swap places with Fee, I was happy enough. It was just too bad there was no chance of Chris and Robin getting off together. Then we really could have had perfect partners. Chris had brought back a few packets of smokes and 2 bottles of port that he'd souvenired, as he called it. I sat on the log beside me until he lit up and I politely asked him to move. I couldn't help wondering how far we would go with his souveniring idea. It made me reflect on what I'd been thinking about the night before. If we were going to ignore the laws of the land, we had to work out our own standards instead. I had no problem with the laws we'd broken already. So far we could have been charged with stealing, driving without a licence, willful damage, assault, manslaughter, or murder maybe, going through a stop sign, driving without lights, breaking and entering. I didn't know how many other things. It seemed like we'd be committing underage drinking soon too. Not for the first time in my life, I have to admit. That didn't bother me either. I'd always thought the law on that was typical of the stupidity of most laws. I mean, the idea that at 17 years, 11 months and 29 days you were too immature to touch alcohol, but a day later you could get wasted on a couple of slabs wasn't exactly bright. But I still didn't like the idea of Chris picking up grog and cigarettes whenever and wherever he felt like it. I suppose it was because they weren't as essential as the other things we'd knocked off. Admittedly, I'd taken some chocolate from the Grubers, which wasn't much different, except that at Outward Bound they'd given us chocolate for energy, so it was at least something good you could say about chocolate. There wasn't an awful lot you could say for port or nicotine. I wondered what would happen if Chris brought anything stronger into Hal, or if he tried to grow dope or something down here. But meanwhile, Robin was starting on her big speech, so I stopped thinking about morality and started concentrating on her. Okay, boys and girls, she began. Everyone ready for story time? We've had a pretty interesting couple of days. Although, she added, looking at Lee and me and Homer and Fee, you guys seem to have had an interesting couple of days yourselves. It might have been safe to leave you here alone again. Okay, Mum, get on with it, Homer said. All right, but I'm watching you, remember? Well, where do I start? The first thing, as we've said already, is that we haven't seen any of our families, but we've heard about them. The people we talk to swear they're all okay. In fact, everyone in the showground is meant to be in good nick. What we said jokingly a while back is quite true. They have got plenty of food. They've eaten the scones, the decorated cakes, the sponges, and the homemade bread, the matched eggs, the novelty cakes. Have I left anything out? The fruit cake, said Corrie, who was an expert on their subjects. The jams, preserves and pickles, the best assorted biscuits. Okay, about 3 people spoke at once. And, said Robin, they're eating their way through the livestock. It's a shame, really, because it's some of the best stock in the district. So they should be getting some top-quality tucker. The bread in the CWA tea rooms every morning, there's a couple of stoves in there. For a while they were running short of greens once they'd eaten the young farmer's display, which I might add I helped set up, the day before when we went on our hike. You're not a young farmer, I said. No, but Adam is, she said, looking faintly embarrassed. When our immature wolf whistles and animal noises had died down, she continued, undaunted. But there's been a few developments, she said. They've now got work parties going out of the showground each day. They go in groups of 8 or 10 with 3 or 4 guards. They do jobs like cleaning the streets, burying people, getting food, including the greens, and helping in the hospital. So the hospital is running? We thought it was. Yes, Ellie's been keeping it busy. As soon as she said that, she looked like she wished she hadn't. What? Did you hear something? She shook her head. No, nothing. Oh, come on. Don't do that, Robin. What did you hear? It's nothing, Ellie. There were some casualties. You know that. So what did you hear? Robin looked uncomfortable. I knew I'd be sorry, but I'd gone too far to stop. Robin, stop treating me like a kid. Just tell me. She grimaced, but told me. Those 3 soldiers hit by the ride-on mower, 2 of them died, they think, and 2 of the people we ran over. Oh, I said. She said it flatly and calmly, but the shock was still terrible. Sweat broke out on my face and I felt quite giddy. They gripped my hand hard, but I hardly felt it. Corey came and sat on my other side, where Chris had been, and held me. After a minute, Chris said, It's different from the movies, isn't it? Yes, I said. I'm okay. Please, just go on, Robin. Are you sure? I'm sure. Well, the hospital's had a few other casualties. The first day or 2 there was a lot of fighting. A lot of people got hurt or killed, soldiers and civilians. Not at the showground. The surprise was so complete that they took the whole place in 10 minutes. But in town and around the district with people who hadn't gone to the show. And it's still going on. It's a few group of guerrillas, just ordinary people, like us I guess, who are hanging around and attacking patrols when they get a chance. But the town itself is quiet. They seem to have flushed everyone out, and they're confident that they got it under control. Are they treating people well? Mostly. For example, the people who were in the hospital the day of the invasion had been kept there and looked after. People we've talked to say the soldiers are anxious to keep their noses clean. They know that sooner or later the United Nations and Red Cross will be wandering around, and they don't want to attract a lot of heat from them. They keep talking about a clean invasion. They figure that if there's no talk of concentration camps and torture and rape and stuff, there's less chances of countries like America getting involved. That's pretty smart, Homer said. Yes, but for all that, there's been about 40 deaths just around Wirrawee alone. Mr. Alphys, for one, the whole Francis family, Mr. Underhill, Mrs. Nasser, John Lewing, and some people who have been bashed for not obeying orders. There was a shocked silence. Mr. Underhill was the only one of those I knew well. He was a jeweller in town. He was such a mild man that I couldn't imagine how he might have aggravated the soldiers. Perhaps he tried to stop them looting his store. So who have you been talking to? Lee asked at last. Oh yes, I was getting to that. I'm telling this all out of order. Okay. So this is what happened. We cruised into town the first night, no problems. We got to my music teacher's house about 1:30 a.m. The key was where she always left it. It is a good place to hide out, like I said, because there's so many doors and windows you can get out of. There's a good escape route of an upstairs window, for example. We can go across the roof onto a big branch and be next door in a couple of seconds. Also, the Sentry has a great view of the street and the front drive, and there's no way anyone could get over the back fence without a tank. So that was cool. The first thing we did after we sussed out the house was to get some gear together and go up and set up the fake camp under the Masonic Hall. That was quite fun. We put in a few magazines and photos and teddy bears to make it look authentic. Then Kevin took the first sentry duty and the rest of us went to bed. At about 11 in the morning, I was on sentry duty and suddenly I saw some people in the street. There was a soldier and 2 of our people. One of them was Mr. Keogh, who used to work at the post office. You mean the old guy with no hair? Yes, he retired last year, I think. Well, I woke the others fast, as you can imagine, and we watched them working their way along the street. There were 3 soldiers altogether and 6 people from town. They had a ute and a truck, and it seemed like they were clearing stuff out of each house. 2 of them would go into a house while the soldiers lounged around outside. People spent about 10 minutes in each house. They then come out with green garbage bags full of stuff. They chuck some bags straight into the truck, but other bags were checked by the soldiers and put in the ute. So what we did was, when they got close to us, we hid in different parts of the house and waited for them. I was in the kitchen, in a broom cupboard. I'd been there about 20 minutes when Mr. Keogh came in. He opened the fridge door and started cleaning out all this smelly, foul stuff. It was a job we hadn't been able to bring ourselves to do on an empty stomach when you got there at 1:30. Mr. Keogh, I whispered, this is Robin Mathers. You know, he didn't even blink. I thought, this guy is cool. Then I remembered that he's quite deaf. He hadn't even heard me. So I opened the door of the broom cupboard and snuck up behind him and tapped his shoulder. Well, I know Chris said a few minutes ago that the wall's not like the movies, but this sure was. He jumped like he'd touched a live wire in the fridge. I had to hold him down. I thought, help, I hope he doesn't have a heart attack. But he calmed down. We talked pretty fast then. He had to keep working while we talked. He said if he took too long, the soldiers would get suspicious and come in. He said his job was to make the house habitable again by cleaning out mouldy food and dead pets and to pick up valuables like jewellery. He told me about our families and all that other stuff. He said the work parties would be going out to the country too, starting any day now, to look after the stock and get the farms going again. He said they're going to colonise the whole country with their own people, and all the farms will be split up between them and we'll just be allowed to do menial jobs, like cleaning lavatories, I suppose. Then he had to go, but he told me they were doing West Street after Barrabool Avenue. If I got into a house there, we could talk some more. And off he went. Well, when the house was empty again, we had a quick conference. Kevin had talked to a lady called Mrs. Lee, who'd come into the bedroom where he was hiding, and he got more information from her. So we agreed to go to West Street and try again. We got there fairly easily by going through people's gardens, and we tried a few different houses. The first two were locked still, but the third one was open. So we spread ourselves around it. I got under the bed in the main bedroom. Chris kept watch and told us when they were getting close, which wasn't for nearly 2 hours. It was pretty boring. If you want to know how many cross wires the people at 28 West Street have got on the underside of their bed, I can tell you. But finally, someone come in. It was a lady I didn't know, but she had a green bag and she went to the dressing table and started scooping stuff out. I whispered, "Excuse me, my name's Rother Mathers." Without looking round, she whispered, "Oh, good. Mr. Kerr told me to watch out for you young ones." We talked for a few minutes, with me still under the bed, but sticking my head out. She said she hated having to do this work, but the soldiers occasionally checked a house after they come out, and they got punished if they left anything valuable behind. "Sometimes I'll hide something in the room if it looks like a family heirloom," she said, "but I don't know if it'll make any difference in the long run." She also told me that they were picking the least dangerous people for the work parties, old people and kids mainly. And they knew if they tried to escape or do anything wrong, their families back at the showgrounds would be punished. "So I don't want to talk to you for long, dearie," she said. She was a nice old duck. The other thing she told me was that the highway from Coppers Bay is the key to everything. That's why they hit this district so hard and so early. They bring the supplies into Coppers by ship and send it down the highway by truck. "Just like I said," I interjected. "I never thought of myself as a military genius, but I was pleased to find I'd got this right." Robin went on. "Anyway, there we were, chatting away like old mates. She even told me how she used to work as a cleaner at the chemist part-time and how many grandchildren she had and their names. She seemed to have forgotten what she said about having a short conversation. Another couple of minutes, and I think she would have taken me into the kitchen and made me a cup of tea, but I suddenly realised there was these soft little footsteps coming along the hall. I pulled my head back in like a turtle, but I tell you, I moved quicker than any turtle. And the next thing, there were these big boots right next to the bed, black boots, but very dirty and scuffed. It was a soldier, and he'd come sneaking along the corridor to try to catch her out. I thought, what am I going to do? I tried to remember all the martial arts stuff that I'd ever heard of, but all I could think of was to go for the groin. "That's all she thinks of with us any guys," Kevin said. Robin ignored him. I was so scared because I didn't want to cause any trouble for this nice old lady. I didn't even know her name. Still don't. I didn't want to get myself killed either. I'm funny like that. But I was so paralysed I couldn't move. I heard the guy say, very suspiciously, something like, "You talking?" I knew I was in trouble then. I rolled across the floor to the other side of the bed and crawled out from under the bedspread. I was in this little gap between the bed and the wall, about 1 metre wide, I guess. I heard the old lady laugh nervously and say, to myself, in the mirror. It sounded weak to me, and I guess it did to him too. All I had going for me was my hearing and my guesses. I knew he was going to search the room. I guess he'd start by lifting the bedspread and looking under the bed. Then he'd come round the base of the bed and either go to the built-in or look in the little gap where I was lying. There was no other places in the room where anyone else could hide. It was a bare room, not very nice at all. So I listened for the little swish of his lifting the bedspread, and sure enough, the room was so quiet I heard it. In fact, the room was so quiet I thought I could hear the old lady's heart beating. I knew I could hear my own heart beating. I could hardly believe that the soldier couldn't hear it. Anyway, the trouble was I couldn't hear the second little swish that he should have made when he dropped the bedspread back down. I was in agony, wondering if he was still staring under the bed or if he was coming round to where I was lying. God, I was listening so hard I could feel my ears grow. I felt like I had 2 satellite dishes on the sides of my head. "You look like you do," said Kevin, who never missed an opportunity. And I did hear something, the tiniest creak of what I thought was his boot, and it seemed to be coming around the base of the bed. I couldn't hear my heart anymore. It had stopped. So I thought, well, I can't lie here and wait to be shot. I've got to take the risk. And so I rolled back under the bed. And sure enough, about a second later, I saw his boots in the gap that I'd just left. The fronds on the edge of the bedspread were just moving slightly from where I'd hit them, and I had this terrible time lying there wondering if he'd noticed them, thinking that he must notice them. They seemed so obvious to me, so conspicuous. He seemed to stand there forever. I don't know what he was looking at. There wasn't much to see, just a picture of a long bridge across a ravine in Switzerland or somewhere, I think. Then the boots turned and I could hear him more distinctly, going over to the cupboards and opening them and searching through them. Then he said to the lady, "Come on, next house." And out they went. I lay there for so long, I thought it might have been a trap, but at last Kevin came and got me and told me they'd gone. I'd had a pretty bad time though. Well, I don't need to tell you guys what it was like. "Corrie talked to someone too in the kitchen, didn't you?" she said, looking at Corrie, who gave a little nod. "That's when you told about the casualties from our 2 fights with them." "Yes," Corrie said. "I think they caused a bit of sensation. I talked to a funny little man who looked about 50. I didn't know his name either. He didn't want to talk to me much. He was just so scared that we'd be caught. But he told me there was a bit of guerrilla activity going on. He was the only one who had this theory of the clean invasion too." "So," said Robin, "that was the end of our secret chats with work parties. We made our way back to our hideout and stayed there till dark." She looked at Homer while she said the next bit. It was like they felt a bit guilty, but they were defiant too about the way they'd done things. "Now," she said, "because we had all these carefully worked out plans about Kev and Corrie spying on the showground and so on, but it's different when you get there. The whole time we were in Wirrawee, we didn't want to lose sight of each other." "Young love," I said. "It's beautiful." Robin continued without missing a beat. "So that night we stayed together again. For a start, we walked out to the highway to see what was going on and is being heavily used. We stayed an hour and there were 2 convoys just in that time. One had 40 vehicles and the other had 29. So it's doing big business for a little old rural road. I hadn't seen that much excitement since the surf carnival. After that, we came back into town and went over to the showground. That was bloody scary too. I suppose because of what happened to you guys on your first visit there. In fact, I thought it was pretty gutsy of Corrie and Kev to go there again. And believe me, it is a dangerous place. See, they've got their headquarters and their barracks there, as well as all our folks, so I guess that's why they guard it so heavily. They've cut down most of the trees in the car park, so we couldn't find any approach to it that would have provided any cover. I suppose that's why they cut them down. And they've put rolls of wire all the way around it, about 50 metres from the main fence. I didn't know there was that much wire in Wirrawee. And they've rigged up new lights, floodlights, which have got the entire surrounding area lit up like it's daytime. There's a lot of very confused birds flying around there. All we could do was peek from Racecourse Road, which we did for an hour or so. I guess we were just too scared to go any closer, but honestly, I don't think there's much to see, just a lot of sentries and patrols wandering around. If anyone has any ideas of rolling up there in combat uniform and shooting their way in and rescuing everybody, I think they can go back to sleep. Fantasyland is for TV. This is real life. To be honest, which I swore I'd be, we all had those delusions at times. They were only daydreams, but they were powerful daydreams to liberate our families, to fix everything, to be heroes. But in secret, guilty way, of which I was ashamed, I felt relieved to have the daydream so firmly squashed. In reality, the prospect of doing something like that was so horrifying and frightening that it made me ill to think of it. We would surely die if we tried it, die with our guts blown out and spread across the dirt of the showground car park, to have flies feed on us as we turned rotten in the sunlight. It was an image I couldn't get out of my head, probably born from all the dead sheep I'd seen over the years. We were quite glad to get out of there, Robin went on. We moved back into town and just flitted around like little bats, trying to make contact with dentists or anyone else. Which reminds me, she smiled sweetly at Lee. It's time I took your stitches out. Lee looked nervous. I was trying to imagine Kevin flitting. It was hard to picture. We didn't find anyone though, Robin said. Not a soul. There's probably still a few people around, but they're lying very low. She grinned and relaxed. And that concludes our report to the nation. Thank you and good night. Hey, we could end up being the nation, Kevin said. We could be the only ones let free. So we'd be the government and everything, wouldn't we? Bags being Prime Minister. I'll be the police commissioner, Chris said. We all chose jobs or got given them. Homer was Minister for Defence and Chief of the General Staff. Lee was Pensioner of the Year because of his leg. Robin wanted to be Minister for Health, but got Archbishop instead. Corrie said, I'll be Minister for Kevin. She really could be sickening at times. Fee was Attorney General because of her parents. I got named as Poet Laureate, which I was quite pleased about. Maybe it was that which first planted in Robin's head the idea of my writing all this down. So anyway, Chris said eventually, your turn. What have you guys been doing back here, apart from working on your tans? They'd already admired the chook yard and they'd sampled the eggs, but we told them the rest, especially about the hermit's hut, which we figured would make a great backup for base for us. I want to find a way out of the back of hell, to the Holloway River, I said. I'm sure that's where this creek must go. And if we had a back way out of here, we'd be in an even safer position. Once we're in Holloway, we can get to that whole Risdon area. Lee and I didn't tell them about the metal box with the hermit's papers. There was no particular reason. We hadn't even discussed not telling them. It just seemed too private. Listen, you know these chooks, Kevin said. I've been thinking about other livestock we could have. I'm no vegetarian and I want my meat. And I think I've got the answer. We all waited expectantly. He leaned forward and said one word in a solemn, almost reverent note. Ferrets. Oh no, Corrie squealed. Yuck! They're disgusting. I hate them. Kevin looked wounded at this disloyalty from the one person he could normally count on. They're not disgusting, he said, sounding hurt. They're clean and they're intelligent and they're very friendly. Yeah, so friendly they'll run up your trouser leg, Homer said. What are they? Fee asked. Do you eat them? Yeah, between 2 slices of bread. And you don't kill them first. You eat them alive as they squirm and squeal in the sandwich. They're the world's freshest food. That was Kevin, being funny. He proceeded to give Fee a lesson on ferrets, during which it became obvious that he didn't know much about them either. Homer said, It's true that some of those old blokes around Werribee, the retired miners, keep a few ferrets and live on the rabbits. They haven't got a quid to rub between them, so that's how they keep themselves in meat. There, you see, said Kevin, sitting back on his heels. It was quite a smart idea. I didn't know much about them either, except that you needed nets which you put over all these holes and the rabbits ran into them and were caught. And although there wouldn't be many rabbits up here in the mountains, there was never any shortage of them around the district. Then Chris threw a fly into the ointment. Wouldn't they all be dead? He asked. The ferrets. If their owners are prisoners or dead, there'd be no one to look after the ferrets and keep them alive. Kevin looked smug. Ordinarily, yes, he said, but my uncle, the one out past the Stratton turnoff, lets them run free. He's got heaps of them and he's trained them to come in when he whistles. They're like dogs. They know they'll get food when they hear that signal. He loses a few of them that go feral, but he's got so many he doesn't care. We added ferrets to our list of things to get, do or investigate. Let's grab some sleep, Homer said, then, standing and stretching and yawning. Maybe Ali could run another guided tour to the hermit's hut after lunch for those wishing to partake of this unique and interesting historical experience. Then I vote we have a council of war later this afternoon to work out our next move. Well, you're the Minister of Defence, I said.
Robin, Kevin, Corrie and Chris have returned from Werribee, with Robin now a calm leader in this group. They've discovered the soldiers use captured civilians to clean out empty houses. Why do you think prisoners are sent to clean up and clean out the houses around town? Join me again in the next episode for Chapter 18 of Tomorrow When the War Began.